It is Friday, so let's answer some questions from the mailbag.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to this early edition of a Mailbag Friday. Well, it actually is Friday. It's just early in the morning. But as always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. And you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to hear a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Now, today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. So this is going to be a little bit of a unique episode. I am currently recording this on Thursday before Game 1 between the Royals and the Astros. Unfortunately, I'm going to be getting up early enough on Friday where I'm not going to have time to record an episode, so not really a breakdown of what happens in tonight's game between the Royals and the Astros. None of these questions will be based off of what happens tonight, but that's kind of the beauty of a Mailbag Friday, is that we can have questions about the past, we can have questions about the future, about the upcoming series, about next week's series. It's kind of flexible in that way. So if you watch this tomorrow morning and you're going, why is nobody asking about the game, or why is Jack not recapping what happened? That's because it hasn't happened yet when I'm recording this. I usually don't like to do any pre-recorded episodes, but unfortunately, this is what we have to deal with. And I did want to give everybody an episode on Friday, considering I didn't have an episode on Monday, just a live breakdown with my buddy Braden Turner. So let's kick things off with question number 1 from YouTube. This comes from Brandon. What is it going to take to get us to the top seed in the AL? Bullpen, definitely the weakest piece of this team, but realistically, the teams ahead of us are starting to slow down. I do believe that the quest here to getting the number 1 seed in the American League is a bit far-fetched. I don't think the Royals are going to be able to catch the Yankees. They're not far behind. It just doesn't seem like the Royals, with their schedule left and what the Yankees have left, that they'll be able to catch all the way up. Right now, the focus needs to be on the division and also making sure that wild card spot stays secure. But if they are going to make a push for it, I think it would come down to, this bullpen, not just being stabilized or consistent, but being lights out. I mean, the way they looked in that rain delay game on Wednesday, that's the way they would need to look for the rest of the year for this team to just lock down any lead they had late. But we even saw yesterday the Royals blew a 5-2 lead in the 7th inning. So I'm not too optimistic in the Royals catching the Yankees for the top seed in the American League. But good question still from Brandon. Elizabeth asks, a question for this week's show: who do you think the Royals will offer a contract to next? I would love to see Vinny or Cole offered something. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I do believe that the next guy to get an extension will be Vinny. I think the year that he put in is deserving of an extension. I think it's also a contract the Royals could afford. And they love to reward guys that put together a career year. I don't see this being a Hunter Dozier type year where the Royals gave him a 4-year deal. Vinny's still in his mid-20s. Dozier was nearing his 30s at that point, and they gave him a 4-year deal. I think a 4-year deal for Vinny Pasquantino this offseason makes a lot of sense. But also Cole Reagans is a guy you need to get locked up. That wouldn't surprise me if he was right there alongside Vinny, or maybe even the priority over Vinny because he's a pitcher. Next question comes from, looks like, trying to scroll here up quickly on YouTube, stalling the best I can. Caleb asked this question: what do you see as the ideal teams to play on the road to an ALCS appearance? Give me the teams you would want to play if we get a wild card and the teams we would want to play if we win the division. I just started watching this podcast 2 months ago and is now what I put on every night before bed. You do a great job. Well, appreciate the kind words, Caleb. I'm glad you enjoy the show, and I always take that to heart when everybody gives me the good feedback. And whether it's good feedback or negative feedback, I try to make this the best podcast possible for Royals fans wanting episodes every single day. But I think the teams they would want to draw in the wild card, to me, you're kind of, you have your hands tied because every team has their strengths, and it's a very good field in the American League this year. If the Royals got the last wild card spot, they would either play the Orioles or the Yankees, because those would be the teams that get the number one seed in the the number one wild card seed in the American League. You'd much rather draw Baltimore, I think, in that scenario than New York, because I thought the Royals matched up much better with Baltimore than the Yankees if they got that wild card spot. If they get the second wild card seed, they will play the Houston Astros, because I believe that's who wins the American League West, and that's not a hot take at all. I've said before, I don't really want to play Houston because something changes in October with them. They always seem to hit their stride, and they don't really have a lot of pressure on them. Kind of like the Royals. The Astros did damage in the postseason already. They've gotten their World Series championships, even though one of them is tarnished a little bit. They win a lot. They're successful. They won not too long ago, and this team kind of came back from the dead. So they've got no pressure going into it, and that's a team you don't want to face. In the same way teams look at the Royals. They don't want to face a team that has nothing to lose. There's no pressure on them. But I think matchups-wise, you would want to avoid somebody like a Minnesota, like a New York, the teams you want to draw. I think Baltimore could be a team you match up well, considering they haven't played that well in the second half. And the Royals hung around with them, even though they lost both of those series in Baltimore and Kansas City. They were right there. They blew a handful of those games against the Orioles, and I think it'd be a fun matchup. And Baltimore's another team that has a ton of pressure on them, considering, they're in the middle of their window right now. They need to start winning playoff series. And last year they got swept by Texas. After a 100-win season, they were the number one seed in the American League. They didn't even win a playoff game. So the pressure is absolutely on them. So good question there coming from Caleb. Cole asks, in your opinion, Jack, do you think we have a chance to make a playoff push this year? Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. I think at this point, I'll agree with the FanGraph odds. I'd put it over 90% that the Royals are going to be playing in the postseason. The difference becomes, is it a wild card berth, or is it going to be a division championship from the American League Central side? That'll be something that will be decided in these final 28 games. Next question comes from Desert Fan. Do the Royals need to consider re-signing Paul DeJong for next year? I think Paul DeJong is the perfect rental guy. I think he's thriving because the Royals are catching fire, and he's on a new team, and he was on the White Sox this year, which had to have been depressing as hell. I think at this point in his career, he's not really worth a one-year deal. If anything, I think Michael Lorenzen is worth a one-year deal or a two-year deal going into next offseason. But DeJong, he's kind of nearing, in my opinion, the latter stages of his career. He's been great for the Royals, but I don't think overall for an entire year he would be worth a one-year deal. But you never know. If you get him for 1 year, $5 million, that's fine for a bench bat. And if he can do the same thing he's been doing for you right now, I think it's 100% worth it. Next question comes from, I believe this one's another Mailbag Friday. Yep, Andrew Jenkins says, just wanted to say I really enjoy your show. Thank you for the kind words, Andrew. It's been one of the things I look forward to listen while I'm at work. I do have a question for Mailbag Friday. If given a chance to play, do you think Tyler Gentry can earn his spot on this team and maybe a playoff roster spot? Unfortunately, no. I do not see Tyler Gentry, being on this team much longer, to be honest with you. He might stay up really until Hunter Renfroe gets healthy. And I think Hunter Renfroe will be back once that 15-day IL stint is up. I like Tyler Gentry a lot, but I think his shot is next year. Luke asked, Mailbag Friday question here. What do you think the Royals need to do this offseason? Try and sign a couple of good relievers, a power bat in the outfield. I'd love to hear what you think. I think the focus needs to be, just stabilizing the bullpen. You're going to have Lucas Erceg back. He's your closer. John Schreiber still has another year of control. So does Hunter Harvey. There's three guys right there. You're also going to have Chris Bubich, unless you want to move him to the rotation. And you're going to be parting ways with Chris Stratton. You're going to be parting ways with Will Smith. And I think that you want to go out there and get some high strikeout guys, some high-powered, high-velocity strikeout guys. And since you've got the majority of your bullpen sorted out, there's four guys right there, I'd be willing to spend a little extra cash to bring in somebody who had a damn good year in 2024, not try to go out the scrap heap and get a guy that nobody's really offering contracts to. So bullpen, absolutely. And I think I would try to go out there and sign another starter or two, but for cheap, a 1 year deal, $6 million, $7 million deal. So you have a number 6 and number 7 starter on the off chance somebody gets injured. So that would be my focus. And then never a bad thing to look into adding a power outfield bat. But good question there coming from Luke. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, still plenty more questions to get into next in this edition of a Mailbag Friday on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in Liquid IV. It has been an incredibly hot week here in Kansas City. Fortunately for the Royals, they've not been in Kansas City. They've been in Cleveland, and then they start their series in Houston. I really struggle at times when I'm out there doing yard work or I'm playing beer league softball to just tell myself to be drinking water. Maybe you struggle with the same thing, but Liquid IV takes care of that. You've heard me talk about them. I love promoting Liquid IV because it's something I use every single day. In the morning, I just put a little a bag in there, a little pouch in there, whatever you want to call them. Put them in my water bottle, put them in a Stanley, mix it up there. It tastes incredibly good. And then I just drink it on my way to work and I stay hydrated for a little bit. And then I'll probably put in another one when I get home from work and I'm not dealing with those dehydration headaches or anything like that. It really makes you feel good, makes you stay energized, and of course, makes you stay hydrated. So there are no more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at checkout at liquidiv.com. Gonna hop over to Twitter here and get the next round of questions. Again, it's a unique episode today because we're not talking about what happened in Thursday night's game. This episode's coming out on Friday morning. It's a pre-recorded episode, so bear with me. Really, Fridays are the only ones I can do pre-recorded episodes because they're just questions from you guys, and we're not having to break down what happened in a certain game. So I do apologize. Getting out on the road tomorrow morning very, very early, so I can't really stay up all night and record an episode right after the game. But here is the first round of questions coming over on Twitter. This one is from... looks like Royals Report. Is Adam Frazier a reliable everyday player going forward? No, I think he's a bench bat guy. And when there's a righty in the lineup and Michael Massey's not playing, you'll probably see Adam Frazier out there. He's getting a little bit more run, and Garrett Hampson for that matter, because Hunter Renfroe's on the injured list. Once Hunter Renfroe comes back, I don't think we're going to be seeing Adam Frazier out there in many of the big time series. Likely at this point, a guy that can come in as a defensive replacement if you pinch hit somebody, or he'll be used as a pinch hitter because Matt Quatrero loves those righty-lefty matchups, and for Frazier's case, a lefty-righty matchup. Mizzou Bobbert asked, are you more scared of Cleveland or Minnesota? I do believe we will win the Central. Who's in second? Well, I love the confidence, number one, that it's a battle for second place between Cleveland and Minnesota. But to me, it's not close at all. It's Minnesota. The Royals do not match up well with them at all. That is going to be a fun series next weekend in Kansas City. But Minnesota's got the Royals number. That offense, always seems to pounce on Royals pitching. And Cleveland is a team that's scuffling at this point. They're on fumes. Minnesota, kind of on fumes. And they've got their negatives as well. They're 60-60 this year against the rest of baseball and 12-1 against the White Sox. So they, more so than the Royals, have been the White Sox merchants because the Royals have a little bit better record against teams that are not named the Chicago White Sox. But to me, it's not close. Far more scared of Minnesota than I am of Cleveland. Will asked, why can't our fans ever be remotely happy? One of the biggest turnarounds in MLB history, and all I see is bitching and moaning. Here's what I've gathered, and if you've never really seen me respond to negative comments and stuff after games, is that once you get to, April and May, and you realize that some fans just live and die every single day, it's not worth it to get into back and forth on Twitter because baseball, you play every single day. And you might be mad about one game and the next day you win and then you're happy about it. I think the reason you're seeing a lot of fans be negative at times is because this is the first time in nearly a decade baseball's mattered this late into the season. And when it matters this late, your emotion comes out. You're invested, you're excited, and you're so let down and you're hurt when they lose, and they lose in dramatic fashion. But I will always say this with sports fandom. It is much better to have fans that are polarizing and wishy-washy or to have bandwagon fans than to not have any fans or fans that don't care at all. And that's what it's been the last handful of years. Fans just don't care at this point in the season. It's Chiefs training camp, it's college football, and it's college basketball coming up in the winter. You're not caring about the Royals and their 100-loss record at this point. This year it's different, and they're worth paying attention to, and they're worth getting this invested into. But I understand the frustration because I've had those clashes between the positive and the negative fans in my comments throughout the entire season, from April 1st to even today. Scott asked, Should we claim Tommy Pham and DFA Hampson? I think that the Royals are going to hang on to the veterans they've had all season long. I haven't gotten any feel that they are going to be picking up anybody on waivers. If they do, I would love for it to be somebody like a Taylor Rogers, who was DFA'd by the Giants. Great numbers this year, great left-handed arm, good strikeout numbers. I think he makes perfect sense, but there might be other teams out there ahead of the Royals to place a claim on him. I wanted Tommy Pham back at the deadline. Now I just don't think it makes too much sense, considering I don't think he would play a lot. And Garrett Hampson's fine as a defensive replacement. He's much better defensively than Tommy Pham. Kate asked, with Lucas Ursig being dominant the last outing was tough, do you think he'll bounce back? And a side note, Kyle Isbell homered off of Ursig in the Oakland Series at Kauffman Stadium. I do remember that. Yeah, Lucas Ursig didn't look that good against the Royals at the Coliseum back a couple months ago, but he's been a much different guy since joining Kansas City. I absolutely think that he's going to bounce back. That outing on Wednesday afternoon didn't bother me in the slightest, because on that Wednesday afternoon game, Lucas Ursig got doinked to death. He didn't get hit hard. He was throwing strikes. The Guardians just poked a few singles into the outfield that found some green, and there's nothing you can do about it. I think he's going to come back out next time around and pitch very well. Maybe it'll be tonight in Houston when he does get the ball in a save situation. But no, I'm not worried about Lucas Ursig. I don't get worried about guys until it's 3 or 4 bad outings in a row, and they all look pretty much the same. KC Sports Connoisseur asked, when is Harvey going to be back, and when is it that we can assume Stratton is gone? Maybe wishful thinking, but I don't think I can stomach watching him pitch anymore. When Hunter Harvey returns, which he was supposed to start throwing again on Friday, and that was last Friday, I don't know how that went, to be honest. It's been pretty quiet. So I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but I'd imagine he's going to need to go on a rehab stint. But when he does rejoin the team, assuming he does in the regular season, Chris Stratton will be the odd man out. I do think he'll be the one to get DFA'd so you can get some more power in the back end of that bullpen. This one comes from Short Bam. What difference do you notice between this team and the 2015 team? There's some obvious ones, like one team's bullpen is being a little bit better. But other than that, what is there? Wish you safe travels, and I love your show. Well, thank you for the kind words again. You guys are gassing me up a lot in this Mailbag Friday, which I love it. I do this show for the listeners and people that love Royals baseball, and anytime you guys say that, I truly do appreciate it a lot. The difference, I would say, with this team compared to 2015, yeah, you pointed out the bullpen is the obvious one here. To me, though, I think it's being a more well-rounded lineup. The 2015 team just had great hitters, it felt like, 1 through about 8. The only weak spot in that lineup was Alex Rios, and even Alex Rios came through a handful of times in the postseason. This Royals lineup is very top-heavy, and the big difference there is the 2015 team had nobody that was close to Bobby Witt Jr. Even Lorenzo Cain, who was the best player on that team. Bobby Witt Jr. takes them miles ahead of, or this team, miles ahead of where they would be without him, of course. Salvador Perez is better this year than he was in 2015. And Vinny Pasquantino is comparable to somebody like Kendrys Morales, and I think is going to come pretty close to what Kendrys' final numbers were in 2015. So this group, a little bit more top-heavy, the 2015 team, a little bit more well-rounded with their lineup. But do love that question there from Short Bam. Dynasty Lethal Protector asks, if the Royals don't take the division, do you think they could take the first wildcard spot, and would that give them any advantages? The advantages it would give them is that they would have a home series for the wild card series. So they're 2 games back at Baltimore going into Thursday night's game. And Baltimore, I think, is going to have a little bit more firepower to get to the end and hold on to that number 1 wild card spot. But the Royals are going to have a really good chance. If they do make the wild card spot, it's not the worst thing in the world to be the final wild card team. That's I either want to be the first wild card team, or I want the Royals to be the number 1 wild card team, or the number 3. Because the number 2 wild card team has to go to, or excuse me, I would rather it be the number 1 wild card seed, or the number 3, because the number 2 would go to Baltimore. The number 3 wild card team would go play the Astros. And I guess that goes against what I was saying earlier about not wanting to play the Astros. But the Astros have one of the weaker records in the American League. It's more so about they're the boogeyman for everybody in the American League side for the playoffs. Having the number 1 wild card seed is doable. They're only 2 games back going into Thursday. They were only 2 games back going into Thursday. And that would mean them either hosting Baltimore or going on the road to play Baltimore. That's what it would mean at this point in time. But the focus has to be on winning this division. And I know the Royals are set on winning this division, and they'll have plenty of opportunities to make some ground next week against the Guardians at home and the Minnesota Twins at home. We're going to take our final break of the show. Before we do that, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, we will wrap up our final set of questions on a Mailbag Friday. Next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor in PrizePicks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get that $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play that $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. The final round of questions here on a Mailbag Friday, and if you are jumping back and forth with what questions you want to listen to, again, I know a couple of times I've referenced Thursday night going into Thursday game because that's when we're recording. We are recording this before game 1 of the Royals and the Astros because I'll be heading out of town. So hopefully this episode's been good enough for the questions that were sent in to me both on YouTube and on Twitter. But we're going to kick things off in our final segment with Ben. We still have 100% faith in Ursig to close any game, right? Agreed with that. In a perfect scenario, Lucas Ursig is going to be this team's closer. But there are going to be scenarios in the rest of the gauntlet, the rest of the season, and hopefully in the postseason, regardless of where the Royals play, where the biggest situation in the game is not the 9th inning. It may be the 7th inning, or it may be the 8th inning. And your goal is to get Lucas Ursig in there and then worry about the 9th inning as long as Lucas Ursig can keep that lead intact. So he is the fireman. They would like for him to be the closer, but that also comes down to John Schreiber, James MacArthur, Chris Bubich, Sam Long, all of those guys being able to bridge the gap in the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning. And if they can do that, you can save Ursig for the 9th inning. But there should be no confidence, wavering from people because of the way Lucas Ursig looked on Wednesday afternoon against the Guardians. Nate asked, when we make the playoffs, who is your most comfortable first opponent? There's really not any comfortable first opponent. In a perfect world, if the Royals got the 2 seed by winning the American League Central, that would put them in a spot of facing, I believe, the number 1 seed would get to play the winner of the final wild card team and the Astros. So that would be the Astros. And at that point, I would say the Guardians or Minnesota, which would leave you the Orioles and Minnesota. So if the Royals got the 2 seed, they'd play, let's say, the winner of, actually it'd be the Guardians in Baltimore. So you'd want Cleveland. I think that would be your most comfortable opponent, considering how well you've played against them this year. You're 7-3, and that might be the only team that you'd feel comfortable about because the American League is loaded this year. The good thing for the Royals, 3 of the teams from their division are going to be playing in the postseason. So they've got plenty of familiarity with a lot of the teams that are going to be in it. Half the postseason on the American League side, or in the bracket side, would be from the Central, which is crazy to think about considering how the Royals had to earn a playoff spot this year by being in such a tough division. Walk a Season asks any waiver pickups you think the Royals should make. Rogers comes to mind. Savant Page isn't amazing, but would be a much better option than Stratton or Smith. Yep, I agree with you there. I think Taylor Rogers would be the guy to go after. Got good strikeout stuff from the left side. My brother lives in San Francisco as a Giants fan, and I went to a handful of Giants games this year and got to see Taylor Rogers pitch, and I remember him a lot in Minnesota. That is an absolute upgrade over what Will Smith can give you or even what Daniel Lynch can give you. So I'm wondering if the Royals put a claim on him. We might find out before this podcast episode releases. But, yeah, I'm with you there. I think Taylor Rogers would be the most intriguing candidate to go out there and get. Brody asked, what is your power rankings for our bullpen arms right now? Lucas Ursig would be number 1. I would say Chris Bubich would be number 2. Number 3 would be John Schreiber. Number 4 would be Sam Long. 5 would be MacArthur. 6 would be Hernandez. 7 would be Lynch, and 8 would be Chris Stratton. I think those would be the 8 right there, unless I'm missing somebody. I don't think I am. Sometimes I get twisted up with the number of bullpen arms out there, but I believe that's all 8 that are on the team right now. Blake asks, do you believe in a playoff game with Cole on the mound that he consistently reaches 98 to 100, or do you think he will sit around 93, 95? I think he would be a little bit amped up. We've seen that a few times this year, that in front of big crowds, that velocity can get up to 97, 98. But I also think it's a part of his strength that he can go anywhere from 93 to 99, because you're already worrying about his devastating changeup, his cutter, his slider, his curveball, and then his fastball is tough to, figure out a little bit. Sometimes it comes in at 93. Sometimes he ramps it up to 98, 99 for a strikeout pitch. I don't think he'll be sitting 98 to 100 in a playoff game, but I think I would expect anywhere from 95 to 96 in a sold-out stadium with the playoffs, on the line there. And if it's an elimination game or game 1, I'd imagine that he would be pretty pumped up to start in a game like that. Because we saw on opening day at a sold-out Kauffman Stadium, he was hitting 97, 98, 99. This one comes from Jeff. This is a 2-part question, but thanks for always doing these. First, with 13 games, what is the over-under? I'm assuming that means for wins. And second, what should the Royals' record be in the last 15 games? So I would put the over at 6.5 for the Royals, because if they can go 7-6, you're fine with that. But I also think it's going to come down to a few games over 500 or a few games under 500 for how these next 13 games go. But I would set the over under at 6.5, and I'm going to take the over on that win total for the Royals in these next 13 games. Then what should they go in the final 15? Well, if they go 7-6 in their next 13 games, that would give them 82 wins, and I think they need to get to 88. So as long as they get to 6 wins, I'd probably put it a little bit more at 8. I'd say 8-7 over the last 15, because you always want to play a little bit over 500 when you're just trying to hold off some teams that are chasing you. So I'll go 8-7 in those final 15 games. And lastly, this one comes from Matt. Has MJ done enough in the second half, his second really good second half in a row, to convince you that he deserves another shot at everyday left field job next year? Do you think Renfroe opts in or opts out at the end of the season? For Renfroe, pretty easy for me. I think he opts in for next year because he's been banged up a few times and he started so slow to begin the year. And I don't think he's going to be getting any big contract in free agency. And as for MJ, I think MJ thrives in a role where he doesn't play every day. I think he only faces righties. Yeah, you'd love to see him, hit well against lefties, and he's been better of late. But I like him more as a platoon option. I think the Royals need to go out there and find themselves an everyday left fielder if Hunter Renfroe's coming back and Kyle Isbell's coming back. But to me, I think MJ can be that guy off the bench that plays 3 to 4 times a week, faces righties, and crushes them. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off of him. And it takes a lot of pressure on the Royals, or takes a lot of pressure off the Royals in trying to force him to be an everyday player, because I just don't think he is. I think he is fine in playing 3 to 4 days a week. So those are my thoughts there on MJ Melendez. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of a Mailbag Friday on Locked On Royals here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, we're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast and prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, we're going to be off all the way until Monday, so we're going to be bringing you an episode either late Monday night or it'll be early on Tuesday morning. We'll definitely be having 5 episodes next week, so you won't need to worry about that. But I'm going to be hitting the road. Hope you enjoyed this episode and hope you enjoy this series against the Houston Astros at Minute Maid Park. But until next week, you take it easy, Kansas City.